Hello, Grandmasters. Welcome to the chess team practice from December. I know we had a little bit of break in November, but we're excited to be back. And without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our coach, David, and the members of our team. Thank you, David.
All right. Thanks, Anthony. Great to be here. So we were just talking about getting started with some Fischer games. So look at a couple of Bobby Fischer games. And yeah, he really is known for being a more complex player. So where someone like Capablanca, I think I've shown you guys a little bit of Capablanca before, I think. And I'd say Capablanca is more of like a really lucid player, just really instructive, just like anyone, you don't really need a guide necessarily. Like I would just say, look up on chessgames.com, just go look up a Capablanca game and say, okay, Capablanca chess games. It'll give you like 10 notable games. You can look at his world championship matches. You can pretty much just flip through those and just absorb that. That's a great method you guys can use for end games. But you probably want a little bit of a guide. Like you can read my 60 most memorable games by Fischer, or we'll discuss tonight together. So just let me know whenever you guys have questions, because his play definitely gets complex. But the point is, if you can understand a Fischer game, you're good, right? Because then whatever hits the fan, you guys will be ready for it, right? So let's see. I have a study with a couple of Fischer games that I liked, the end games. So again, but the key is that really looking ahead and making those evaluations ahead of time, right? Not just evaluating what's in front of you, like seeing ahead 5 moves, but then saying, okay, in those 5 moves, I have this end game. Now, what is that? Is that end game worth going into or not? So it's like it's this interesting form of visualization that you really want to master. Okay, let me share the screen with you guys now. 1 second. Okay, you should see it coming up in a moment. You guys see it now? Okay, so we have Fischer versus Guimard, Carlos Guimard. So, or rather, Fischer's playing with black. So D4, Knight F6, Knight F3. Now Fischer always liked to go G6. So we'll kind of, at least we'll just flip through the beginning of it, focusing on the end game. But we'll just get into the thick of it and just kind of see how that transition happened. But let me know if you guys have questions along the way. I'll look at this part more quickly though, because that's not the focus. So this was his favorite setup, the kind of Bishop G7 with D6. This would be like a modern defense or Kirk defense. Usually it's if it's D4, if it's against D4 with C4, it's a King's Indian. But against D4 and E4, it's technically called like a modern defense with the Bishop G7. Okay, well he already has the bishop pair. That's useful. That's an uncontested dark squared bishop that will come in handy. But his opponent's able to actually brew up a pretty good attack against him. So it's interesting. It's kind of defense as well, the way he handles this. It's also about defense, and one defense method is trade down, go into an endgame, get rid of their attackers. Okay, now you see, why do you guys think he's playing this move C5?
It challenges White's pawn structure.
Right, because he has this, well, he can play C3 and he has a pretty solid pawn chain, it looks like, right? So by playing C5, he's striking at essentially his strength. They're trying to show it's not really his strength. And that bishop, again, that's his uncontested. You always want to have an uncontested bishop, but that's why it's good to have the bishop pair. You get both of them, and one of them they can work together, and ideally one of them is uncontested, where nobody can really challenge this bishop. So he's like, well, that's my strength. I mean, if I need to use it. Let me blast open those dark squares. Okay, H4. So his opponent just said, okay, I'm just gonna ignore you and try to checkmate. I'm gonna try and checkmate Bobby Fischer with H4. I'm not sure who his opponent was, probably another grandmaster. Okay, so after H4, pawn takes. Just ignores him again, H5. But he is inducing some kind of damage on his king side, right? After H5. So he just bypasses it. I mean, what else do you have here? He's got 2 attackers aiming at G6. Well, he's working different. Guimard is working different lines, right? He's trying to pry open the H file, pretty typical H4, H5 against this fianchetto, to pry open the H file. Since you've already moved your pawn out to G6, it's like an obvious target, right? And then this one was trying to at least essentially loosen up that diagonal. So whereas Fischer worked on this diagonal, his opponent wants to work this diagonal. But Fischer can handle it. So he wants to keep the lines closed, obviously, bypasses. And now he's threatening checkmate at the battery or the rocket coming into h7. So he needs to react somehow. The thing about that is often, here he blocks directly, but often you could even move your rook over and allow the just a little side note, but it's good to know you can actually allow it. Sometimes it's scarier than it looks. Or, I mean, it looks scarier than it is, because after king f8, they can't really do anything sometimes, and you can often run out with your king, or sometimes the queen just kind of is useless on h7 if she can't get further checks. That's the nice thing about this bishop. You can't challenge the bishop. So he holds the dark squares, just as long as you don't get checkmated on the light squares. But he does block in this case. Takes en passant, right? You guys remember whenever you can pass, whenever you go next to it, you can take en passant if you want. But see, that's the same idea. So he moves the rook. He just needs to create a little bit of breathing room. So if that check happens, it's going to happen soon. But when it happens, you could just play king f8, and it's not that big of a deal. It's a little sketchy, but you're not getting checkmated. Okay, knight takes. So this was interesting. He had to do some calculations where he didn't like taking the knight. Maybe it was correct. Maybe it was a correct sacrifice that actually worked, a sound sacrifice. So knight takes g5. Let's see. If the pawn had taken, what do you guys think Guimard has in mind? At the very least, he might get some material back. Looks like he might end up getting the bishop back. What do you think? Where's he going to go?
Well, one thing I noticed is that now white has a passed. With that, white has a passed h pawn.
Yep.
Which is strong enough in itself.
Yeah, he's got I think so. Yeah, he's got the diagonal pressure. He's got the h file pressure, which would supporting the passed pawn. I think it's probably just going to be if he were to take, I think it would just be queen check, and then push that pawn, because it'll say you go here. That bishop is pretty bad actually, because this bishop is now trapped. So essentially his opponent would get the material back with interest, right? So it's like, why does he want to go into that? It's not, even if he went here. Oh, this doesn't look too healthy either. I think he just runs the pawn. Can't go here. Oh, I guess you could go here. No, never mind. It's pinned. What am I thinking? Warming up, right? Yeah, it's pinned. So he just wins it back. He wins it back, but with advantage. He's getting his piece back, but he's about to get a queen, and he can easily castle queenside and be tucked in. This king is totally exposed. So yeah, obviously Fischer's not going to allow this. So this is where it gets messy, but we actually get to the end game pretty quickly. So knight takes g5. Okay, so he finds his counter thrust, d5. So he's saying, all right, if you want to keep your threats alive, you have to do that check, which he does. So he moves over. Then he castles queenside, and he just kind of ignores him for a little bit. But like I said, this is essentially what happened, where the queen got in, but where is the attack? Because he's holding the dark squares. He has so much control over the dark squares. As long as, like, for example, if there were a bishop controlling this diagonal, that would be over if he can get in here and support the queen. But because he can't really get in enough, he should be fine. And this knight is always something he has to worry about. And meanwhile, you'll see he's gonna try to actually make the queen uncomfortable. So it was really deep that he saw that this is not actually that bad. Again, the kind of an example of the ugly move, right? Allowing knight takes g5. And I'm sure he saw it ahead of time. But the thing is, knight c6, there's actually a direct idea here. How do you guys think he could try to trap this queen? Because it doesn't have any escape squares. So how do you guys think, what's his strategy to trap the queen, Daniel?
Attack the bishop, maybe.
Exactly. So if you can undermine the bishop, let's say you can go here. Well, I mean, I guess he can take back, but then we're chasing him out. If we can take, either if the pawn takes, we have bishop f5. If the queen were to take, we would still have bishop f5, I think. And we would, yeah, I mean, we'd have actually by that point, we'd probably be able to win the knight. I mean, because then we'd take this thing out of his position. I mean, if the queen has to retreat, then we can actually take, and we keep our blockade. The second he can't push, we just take the pawn, right? So that queen needs to be there to allow this knight to hang essentially. The knight's just drop. It's like on free. It's just hanging to be taken. But you can get away with it as long as you have as long as this works, it seems. But yeah, that's the idea, is just calmly, just all this chaos is happening, but he kept his cool. It was objective, and he just calmly develops and says, look, I understand that's one of the keys to chess mastery too, is just understanding what your opponent's resources are. That allows you to be objective. Say, look, I understand everything that white has here. I'm not giving him an H file. I'm not giving him any more check. The rook and the bishop, and just hold the fort. So yeah, he should be fine. And then now I guess he has to play A3 or something, because this is actually either, no, he's gonna come either way now. Can't really stop the knight. So he stops him from going to E5. But yeah, as Patrick said, sorry, Daniel said, coming into B4. And you prefer Daniel, right? Daniel or Dan?
I don't really have a preference. Daniel's
Okay.
fine.
I'll just go with Daniel. I go David and keep it simple. All right, so knight B4, A3. There you go. So he takes it, and now the queen literally has to go back, because if he wants to keep his queen in the territory, that's when we're going to see bishop F5 and game over. Queen's just, again, she looks aggressive, but she just doesn't quite do enough, right? She ends up getting trapped. She can't go anywhere because the bishop. So what happened is queen took back, and then he takes the knight. Now, but this is where I mentioned, the foresight that he had to have to know that he could finally take the knight, because even here it's a little bit murky. So let's look maybe on the next move we'll start to calculate, because he's going to take back with the pawn. When he taking back with the pawn, he's going to get like a pawn storm, right? Actually, he had an immediate H6. Bishop takes. Yeah, I would have calculated this. Now you'd have to look at this as well, because this seems strong too, doesn't it? It seems like it gives him compensation for the piece. Maybe that's what he should have done, actually, but I'm sure he didn't see as far as Fischer did, where Fischer found this brilliant line that leads to a winning endgame. But I don't know. I think white has. It seems like white has compensation, doesn't he? I'm sure Fischer can handle it, but it is a little, it's a little daunting, having the pawn storm coming at. I mean, you can toss in like bishop F5 anyway, but let's just say he's got his work cut out for him. He's not gonna glide to victory here. But after H6, this gets murky. So bishop takes, pawn takes. Okay, so I want you guys to try to start calculating it. I'll block this part so you can just get distracted by any moves. Okay, after bishop F5, or right after and after rook takes. So try to just calculate what's going to happen with rook takes H6. Try to anticipate how this might go, and then we're going to look at it. Kind of goes into another phase that we'll look at, but just look at a few moves ahead. Like, what's the idea of rook takes H6 for white? Okay, Daniel, what do you see in there? What's the idea of rook takes H6?
So he's looking to trade his rook and queen for two bishops and a queen.
The rook and queen.
Because after rook takes
Oh
bishop,
yeah, like
bishop takes queen.
liquidating it all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you're saying rook takes H6, and then if the bishop takes the queen, and then
rook H8 check.
Right, getting a skewer where the king has to move out of the way.
And then rook takes D8. And then after the rook takes back, then you take the bishop on D3.
Yeah, and the rook will still be hanging on F6 too.
Oh.
So Fischer's going to have to deal with that, and that's where it gets tricky.
Right.
But we know the main idea now, right? You're talking about going to H8. He wants to he wants to liquidate after this, and says, okay. Well, the other problem is if you can't take the rook really, because then this gets taken with check. And then he takes the rook back, and actually that's the next guy. Guimard loses the knight. He's up a knight, yeah. So because you see, if you do this one, where are we? Rook takes. Yeah, if you take here, he takes with check. I mean, you can block and you just lose it to the pawn, right? If you come here, you're guarded by this pawn, and then this pawn takes it. So yeah, I get lost in this, but it's going into the marsh, like into the swamp, right? Gets confusing. So bishop f5, rook takes. Yeah, I mean, so you really don't have time to take. King moves, and then yeah, you're just gonna lose this up a knight, right? So what does he do? Then you got to look at bishop takes d3. So you take the d3. He does his check. King moves. Then he's going to take your queen. So then now he had to see all this. It actually goes even deeper than that. But he had to see all this to determine that he has a really nice move. Because see, the problem here is that as we said, the bishop's hanging on d3 at the end of this line, and your rook's hanging on f6. So if you simply take back the rook that's on d8, they're going to take your they're going to take your rook. So we have to you have to find like the perfect move. So see, I'm going to see if you guys. I'm not going to move. I'm not going to go ahead yet. I want to just see if anyone could find it from here, because in a real game you would kind of have to evaluate that again, looking at it before you make this whole a series of exchanges. So try to see if you can find it. Try to visualize it. So we got. If the rook takes h6, if you trade queens, bishop takes d3, rook h8 check, king moves, let's say the king goes to f7, rook takes queen. Okay, so try to visualize that position. You guys all see the position I'm talking about? So rook takes queen, it's black's move. Black to play. What did Fischer find ahead of time that made him confident to go into this?
Okay, I think I see it.
You see it, Patrick? What's your candidate move there? It's like well, essentially every single move has its own candidate move, right? But a few moves deep, you're seeing a new candidate move, a new option. What is that?
Rook to c6.
Oh, you found it. Nice. Because so the thing is, your bishop's hanging on d3, will be hanging. Your rook will be hanging on f6. This is such an effective move, such an efficient move, because rook c6. And then you can maybe start to see a little deeper, right? So the idea is after that, but it doesn't lose either piece. Although it does hang your rook, because the rook's on d8. So imagine, so your king's on f7, let's say. Probably not g7, because then they would take with check. That's important. So a little nuance there. Go to f7. Okay, they're going to take your queen, and then they're going to take your rook. But your rook's on c6 now, and your bishop's on d3. But you can see it easily enough now, because there's not too much, there's not too much static here going on. It's pretty clear what's happening, because your bishop's on d3, your rook's on c6, their rook's on a8. So now, obviously, what are we going to do with our bishop and rook to keep the attack going?
Rook takes c2.
Right, rook takes c2, and again, you're down a rook right now. In this line, you're going to be. This is like what, like 4 moves ahead from here. You're going to be down a rook. But the king has to walk into the line of fire of your bishop, which means on the next move, what can you do?
Rook c8 check.
Back and take the rook. Actually, first you take the knight, because you're hitting the rook. We're going to play it out now. But yeah, first you take that. You force it back. Then you do like a little windmill. You come back. So he had to see that. And then he sees, okay, then you come back to c8. So he takes your bishop, you take his rook. So you end up trading everything and going into a rook versus rook endgame. So he probably saw I would not be surprised if he had like a crystal clear vision of what that entire thing was going to look like, whatever it was. That was like starting like this whole force sequence probably 2-3 moves ago. And now we're another like 6 moves ahead. So he's probably looking around 9-10 moves for full. So like, that'd be like 20 half moves. And seeing at the end of seeing the position at the end of the line with the rooks, and then being able to evaluate that position. So I mean, yeah, this is not something that we all need to do yet, but that's only Fischer could do it that well. But the point is that it's the idea of sometimes you only need to look maybe 2 moves ahead, but the key is that you don't just evaluate what's in, it was like one thing if you look ahead a few moves and say, oh, I'm going to get a checkmate, but to look ahead a few moves and say, I'm going to get a good end game. So it's the more subtle evaluations, and that's going to set you apart from your competition, the ability to say, oh, I'm gonna, in a couple moves I can make, or I can, first you need to make a good evaluation right in front of you, but you have to be able to evaluate the future essentially, right? Evaluate a future position and say, well, I can get that. I see I can do that. So you have a snapshot essentially, right? You have a few snapshots. Say this, I can have this option. I could have this option based on like a tree. So you're making your calculation tree that we talked about, right? You're making that tree. You have that at the end of the tree is like you have a position in mind. It might be, usually it's only like 2-3 moves deep. But the key is that you then need to evaluate that. So that's what, so we're going to go to that position. But we take this. So we just had this, right? Bishop F5, rook takes, bishop takes, check. Oh wait, actually he went to G7. I'm a little bit surprised. Maybe it doesn't make a difference. Maybe he's, oh, obviously he can't take though. He doesn't have time to take because, wait, what? I don't know. That's actually interesting. I wonder why he didn't. What would have happened if he had taken, unless they got the notation wrong, it just doesn't make sense to me. Why you would, because it seems like he gets to win the rook that way. Takes, take. Huh. What would have happened? Let's try and figure that out. Oh, he just takes the rook. That's why. Simple answer. That's the, so by going to G7, he just preferred his king on G7, I guess. But he's actually attacking the rook with his king as well. So yeah, he doesn't have time to toss in this move because now he keeps his queen. He needs to get the queen back in order for this line to work for Carlos, right? So he takes the queen back, and that's the move that Patrick found. There it is. So Fischer plays rook c6, and he's essentially, so it's interesting because it's fascinating. He had 3 loose pieces, whereas white has 1 loose piece, black had 3 loose pieces. But when he plays this move, it's just a highly efficient move. You deal with both of these. Now the rook's under threat and is under threat. So he pretty much has to take the rook. Otherwise, you're just going to take his rook, right? So he has to take it. I mean, or he can do something else, but then again, you still run into rook takes c2 check. So he does that. So again, temporarily down a rook. Now you could do this move. So you might see that in your earlier calculations, like, oh, at the very least, I have this, and I could take the rook back, because you guys see the discovered check, right? Because you lured him over here, get your discovered check, and take the rook. But you have a windmill, because the cool thing is when you take the knight, you're hitting the rook. So if he moves his king away, you're like, oh, I take, now I'm up a bishop, game over. I'm winning. It's a forced win, essentially, winning the endgame. He can easily win that. Just going to use his usher in the past pawns or win more pawns with his extra bishop. So he comes back. Now he doesn't trade. He goes back to the original c2 position. But this time, where's he going?
He's probably going to take G2.
Now, be careful. This is a typical it's a windmill, typical idea. There's a famous Lasker game like that where he kept swinging around. You can swing, and each time you get a check. But the problem is if you take, what's the refutation? Why does this fail? See it for both sides. What would your opponent do?
Oh, rook just takes bishop.
Right. Unfortunately, yeah. And also, it wouldn't come with a new threat. So let's say even if the bishop were safe, he would just move his king, and then you wouldn't be able to get the rook. But by doing this, so essentially you're essentially right now, after all this, you're down in exchange for some 5 pawns for 4 pawns, but almost equal. But you're down in exchange temporarily. But when you do this move, you're like, okay, you can have my bishop back, I get your rook back. So after all that, we've gone through this whole transaction, right? All these trades were pretty much forced though. So sometimes forced lines are not as hard to calculate. But rook c6 is a kind of a quiet move, so it's a little tricky. It's easy for either side to miss this move. But of course, Fischer, yeah, he was pretty good at seeing things like that. But again, the key is to see. You get into a rook endgame, but a lot of people would just be like, okay, look, I'm just going to throw my hands up and be like, yeah, I get a rook endgame, but like, I don't know, I can maybe see this kind of clearly. Maybe I'm not really, but you're not really sure if it's actually a win or not. So you just throw up your hands like, I'm just going to do something else. A lot of players wouldn't go for this. But the thing is, Fischer actually, he saw that he would get this, and that actually he has a win. So the question is, why is this? I think it's pretty clearly a win right here even. Yeah, so it's a big advantage. Yeah, it looks like it's a win. So why is this already a win for Fischer? After, okay, the rook takes the pawn. So we both have 4 pawns, but let's start racking up all the advantages he has here.
White has a double pawn.
That's, yeah, and not only is it a doubled pawn, the question is it a weakness? Are these doubled pawns a weakness that can be attacked?
The king can attack them.
Yeah, the king is actually optimally placed right there. you can easily go up and try to tie the rook to them. Or if not, then you just win the pawn. Okay, what else? Daniel, I saw you hand your hand up. Or Andres, do you have any thoughts about this position? Any of the advantages, things you like about Fischer's position?
I was just going to point out the doubled pawn.
Yeah, the double pawns are actually a big factor, because essentially what that means is, well, you've got this clean, these clean pawns here that are not, nice and healthy, right? And his double pawns are not going anywhere. In some cases, double pawns are fine, but here, deep in the end game, well, essentially, it almost acts like one pawn, right? Because the other one can wait behind it, but whereas these two can work together, and it's very powerful, if they can, because also in a king and pawn endgame, like let's say we traded, you should always imagine when you're in the endgame, you should always imagine, okay, what happens if you trade the rooks off or trade everything off? And if you're in a king and pawn endgame, that's going to give you like the purest evaluation, right? Just liquidate everything. And then you're going to have a bare bones situation, right? So just with this, now the thing is, in this situation, one pawn can go up and support the other pawn, and the king can never get it, because if the king ever takes it, the second one runs. The front pawn runs. So you can use them to link together and support each other. Whereas these pawns obviously can't. These guys are just gonna fall like ripe apples, right? So that's really the advantage. Knowing that you have the winning king and pawn endgame is advantageous, because you can always threaten trades of rooks. Essentially, whenever you try to trade rooks, that's going to make your opponent retreat, essentially, which is nice for you. And but also without the trade of rooks, it's also enough to win. It takes some technique, but look at it's really nice how smooth he does this, how smooth the technique is. So rook d8, but then this is the kind of situation, okay, you got to take a deep breath, like get some water or something if you're in a tournament, but like because you've gone through all this, so you kind of have to find a way, psychologically, you have to find a way to put everything else behind you, because whatever happened. It's like in life too, right? Whatever happened. You're here where you are now, right? So deal with what's in front of you to the best you can. It's all about just making a clear evaluation. But so if you're thinking about all that other stuff, and that could give you like kind of cloud things, right? So just clear your mind somehow, take a deep breath, say, okay, what's the new position? How do I treat this? It's like a whole new game right now, right? So say because I've messed up a lot of positions where I should have won. It's happened to all of us, right? The hardest thing to win is a one game. So Fischer should be winning this, but you gotta, the psychological element is very important. It's tricky because just gotta clear your mind, say, okay, what do I need to do? What's my strategy? But pretty much it's going to be, you got these two pawns working together, support those and win these pawns. One other advantage in terms of, you mentioned the king can take this pawn, but also he's more active. This king is a little farther. This guy can like easily come to e5. This king might, especially with the pawns coming at him. So that actually your pawns are going to improve your king position as they march forward. Your king, they could be like a shield for your king. So that's one of the, you want to have active rook and you want to have an active king in the end game. So when you combine all that, that's going to help you win end games, and you won't be afraid of going into it saying, hey, look, it's not just a draw. I can win these, I can score a lot of points like this. Okay, so king g6. Here, just takes the pawn. I guess there was nothing he could have done. Okay, what would have happened? Okay, what if you had gone here? How would you win the pawn? Oh, I already kind of traced it out, but you may actually have even a simpler way. What's the simplest way to win that G pawn?
Maybe d4 and then rook d5.
That could work too. Well, I guess then you don't want to strand this pawn though, because if you go here and here, when you take it, they're going to take it. Well, unless you get 2-for-1 deal, maybe you get. Well, that's actually what kind of happened. He ended up liquidating like 2 of these for one of his central pawns, and then the last one wins. So if you need to, that's possible. Or as I traced out too, you can see it. Just come around this way, because the thing is, if you do end up supporting it with e5, then you're going to block your rook's path. But that's possible. Also, what about your king? What can your king do?
Can attack the rook.
Yeah, I think you just keep attacking the rook, because if he goes back, you just go after him again. And again, there's those doubled pawns. They're isolated doubled pawns. And it's one thing if they're doubled and they have like another pawn nearby to help out. There's just nothing to help them out. So he goes back, you attack him again. Let's say he checks you. Finally, you take this pawn. It's kind of roundabout, but yeah, either way, you should be able to win one of them. So that's why he said, all right, take the pawn. I see you're going to get it anyway. But I'm at least, the defender, in this case, Guimard's defending now. He should at least stay active. Just if you have a rook on the 7th rank for white on the 7th, white on the 2nd, that's usually what you want because that's where the pawns are still sitting, the original square. So you try and win as many of those pawns as possible, trying to bother them as much as you can. But he just plays very calmly. He just guards his pawn, kicks the rook out. So he has to make a choice. I mean, he's got to give ground somewhere. He goes down here, but that allows him to kicks him away again. But that allows him to move his e pawn now. Now that he's cleared, because before he was pinning the e pawn, right? So he wanted to play this move probably. So he kicks that rook out of there. Okay, no problem. Just guards it laterally. So this rook is holding everything now. So it's very efficient. Now, what if the king comes out? Well, you want to play e5, yeah, but how are you going to get that in?
King f6.
Right, you start with king f6. It's a little tricky because he can check. The defender also, one defensive technique is you just get your rook active and check. They say like 10%. I think 10% of all master games end in rook end games because they're just the last ones to come out, right? Everything else liquidates and then the rooks are left. And so you just want to stay active, and so they can always check you. So watch out. Always just think about if you were playing with white here, what would you try and do to bother your opponent, right? You just got to be used, just like we talked about before, right? Get used to thinking that perspective, always thinking from your opponent's perspective. But you can see, okay, it's not that big of a deal. You just go in front, because once you go in front of the pawn, I already kind of take it off so you guys can figure it out. Once you go in front of the pawn, what are you going to do next? So obviously it doesn't have to stay there.
You push your pawn?
Which one?
The G pawn.
Oh, okay, white's gonna start pushing their G pawn, and while they're busy doing that, we are gonna get this pawn mass rolling though. We're gonna get those pawns rolling down the board. But how are we gonna set that into motion?
King to D6.
Right, Andres, yeah, king D6. They can do what can they do? I guess they can do rook F5. They could do rook F5. They can try and slow us down for a little bit, but we always put that threat's in the air. Well, really what he does is you just go king D6, and if you need to, you go E6 first. So you've got everything kind of where you need it to be. I think that's what he did right now. No, he did E5. But if you tried to stop him, for example, or if you checked him again, right? There's the other check. Say, okay, so essentially when you play this move, you need to be ready for a series of checks. Say, okay, but I anticipate. I can visualize my king goes here. It's more like instead of, a thing that can help you also with calculation is a good trick I found is don't just look at the moves. Just think about, again, it's more like a snapshot. Just have a snapshot in your mind, a picture in your mind of where you want to be. So I want my king here and I want my pawn either here or pushing here. So if I can simply imagine, I don't need to calculate every move my opponent can do, right? Because I know no matter what happens, I can go here. Well, almost no matter what happens, but the goal is if I can get here on the next move, then I can shield it, right? So for example, if this were to happen, if he were to check, all you have to do is just go here, but that frees you, and then your rook starts swinging around laterally. So let's say now he does his G4 thing. Okay, now you could swing around. Everything's guarded, which is nice. You don't have to worry about anything. Probably this way, and then eventually, you check him and you start move the king back and you start approaching, and then you can either win the G pawn with your king and your rook, or just get those pawns rolling. So you'll make progress. But his opponent didn't really stop him. He went for his G4, but then Fischer's pawns just start moving. So getting that, he's noticed that, see how his pawns are controlling all the squares. King can approach, shield him off with your 2 pawns, and you can check him to kick him back one more. And then now he's like, okay, let me just, obviously this is a threat, so just that's the one hope they have to either defend this game or even win the game is this pawn. So obviously we're not going to let that work. And a tip is, okay, if you're trying to win with this pawn, you should have your rook behind the pawn. This is the least ideal place to be there. The ideal place is behind the pawn. Second best is actually sideways. Generally, you want to be sideways because you can often like support with your king or something, or you can still do other things like checks. But being in front of it is not ideal because once you can't get a queen, right? Let's say you get to here, as long as they don't allow any checks, if they stay close enough or cover the square, you shouldn't be able to get a queen. So that's another tip. You guys just keep that in mind. So try to have, if you want to promote, be behind your pawn so you can support it as it's pushing. Okay, so he checks him back, checks him. Yeah, and then Fischer is the one who gets behind the pawn. That's where you want to be as a defending against the pawn too. But actually, the pawn is just falling now. You can take it whenever you want. It's not going anywhere. And so this is where, yeah. So like for example, you sometimes, or if your king, especially if it's far away, you have to watch out for those checks where they can then queen. But his king is close enough. He can't do it. Now if he checks, he just wins the pawn. So that pawn's going. Yeah, he actually just, I mean, yeah, he's forcing it basically because he's going to get the queen. I mean, you could, yeah, he's going to get this pawn. Basically, going to get this pawn, you're going to get this one. But then he's left with that one pawn. So it all comes down to that one extra pawn. But now you have to have precise technique because you can't let this slip away. It could become a draw sometimes. But this is a really nice move. So why is this move so strong? Rook c7.
It gives the rook an open file and prepares. It starts an attack on the remaining pawns or a plan to protect the passed pawn.
He's got, yeah, it's a very important file he possesses. He might be able to come after the pawns. Depends what the king does. But even if, let's just say everything sits as it is. Let's just say you have like some free moves. What would you do in this position if you could do whatever you wanted? Now that you have your rook on c7, it prepares something very directly.
March your king up and then also your pawn.
Yeah, it's king. So essentially you outnumbered him. It's king and pawn against the rook. The rook can't stop them both. So what you've done is you've cordoned off the opponent's king. So this is very efficient. You don't need to like worry about him coming around and trying to support, get a king and a rook and a pawn and trying to slowly march it forward. You just cut him out of the play. So again, you don't need to calculate all that. You just know the concept. Just like generally speaking, you want to get your rook here, attack this way. If you're playing with black and white wants to get here with their rook, just like you want to get in the end game, you want to get active kings, and you want to at the same time, obviously, you want to try to minimize your opponent's activity, make their king inactive. So once you have this, you pretty much got it in the bag now because you're just gonna push your pawn and support it. He actually keeps going, even though it looks like it's kind of disjointed. But I think at that point he knows he can bring his rook behind, and the king is not able to stop it. So he needs, he's not doing anything here. He needs to go back. He goes again, and then Fischer calculated, of course, that he's not going to lose the pawn. So it's his move. So it takes him 1, 2, 3 to guard it. 1, 2. Well, on the third move, he's already guarding it. Yeah, so he can't take it. Now he guards it. So and now that he guards it, he can just check the king away. So essentially, it's the same difference. I mean, he could have brought his king in first, but or he just or he pushed the pawn first. As long as, I mean, I would probably recommend bringing your king in with the pawn because he did get a little far away. You don't want to lose it, but he knew the rook. Of course, the rook would support it. He calculated it out perfectly. He checks him out of there, and this is a typical technique where instead, because if you go forward, see, that's going to start. They're going to start checking you. You go here, you're like, oh, I'm going to support the pawn. Well, now you get checked away, and the whole thing might get it's almost spoiled. But when you check the king again, so we've created a new, we've cordoned him off again, created a new barrier, and then again, it's going to be easier to promote. Just kicks see, now rather than going here and getting checked, he just attacks the rook directly, makes it go behind the pawn, and then he attacks it again, and he doesn't get bothered by the rook. Then he just wins the rook. Okay, that's game. And then he just, comes in, and that's over, right? Fischer wouldn't have too much trouble there. And check. Actually, he's in a Zugzwang. He has no good. Once he's here, he has no good move, so he has to just throw the pawn away and gets checkmated. And so I was looking through some of his games. I'm like, okay, this one's it's a pretty complex game, but it's interesting, right? Did it make sense to you, the main concepts of the game? Any questions? Okay, and the second one is a little clearer. I think what happens is, so really, but the main story, I think, as I mentioned, I think it's really just about knowing when to trade into the end game, right? And so they're making those evaluations. And in this case, it was essentially, he was under attack too. So he was able to deal with what seemed like a dangerous attack, but it basically bailed him out of the attack. And he was able to get a winning end game, evaluated it correctly, and then just the proper technique. And the proper technique, that's where, like, doing puzzles and stuff, looking at specific examples, like, okay, you have a rook and king endgame, and like a pawn versus 2 pawns or something, and trying to solve those puzzles. That's where it's going to help you make those precise moves. So it is useful to do that. But just looking at the whole game, you get a sense for the flow of the game, just how he got into this winning endgame, and again, the basic concept of essentially the 2 pawns working well together against the weakened pawns and cutting off that king. So a lot of important endgame concepts. Okay, then I'll show you guys this one a little quicker. This is do you guys want to see that I can just flip through the opening again, or do you want to see just the main position, the main endgame? Any preferences? You guys want to see kind of how he got? I just kind of flipped through it quickly, just to give you an idea of how he got there.
Yeah, maybe a flip through.
Yeah, may as well. Just kind of, it's always good. The more of his games you see, it's useful. So, all right, so we have a Sicilian, and you can see different types of openings. So we have a closed Sicilian. Open Sicilian is when you play D4, right, against E4, C5. When you play D4, it's going to be open when you trade pawns. And D3 is like, it's not totally locked up game, but it's not blasting open, right? So we call it closed Sicilian. And he liked to do this King's Indian setup, King's Indian attack setup. This is kind of his signature setup. That's, yeah, Medinus has black, Fischer has white. Okay. So now, usually if you can get this in, it's useful. This E5 push, not prematurely, but so the thing is, he can go knight C4 and put more pressure on the dark squares. So it seems like he has enough support to do it here. Okay, his opponent bypasses it, and he just leaves it there. He could take en passant, but if he takes en passant, it's like remove. That's his main advantage. This kind of like a wedge pawn, squeezing his opponent, with getting more space. There's a knight back, maneuvering a bit, and this is called overprotection. Have you guys ever heard of that concept of overprotection? It's in Nimzovich, the old author, like from the early 20th century, he talked about that concept. So overprotection is like, this is your strong point. So you just add additional protection. And sometimes what happens is they'll play F6 and try to attack it. But then if that happens, your pieces will all be unleashed from that point. So this overprotection idea, just that's your strong point. So just get everything behind it. Okay, so he gets everything out, and theoretically, that's his bad bishop, right? This bishop is actually not a great piece. It's like it's hindered by the pawn. And this bishop is attacking his pawn. So may as well, when you trade it off, and when you do trade it off, what's another advantage of that? He didn't want to do it. But if he did trade it off, how would that benefit Fischer? Strategically.
Benefit the bishop?
Fischer in general. Like let's say just imagine these bishops are removed.
Oh, then the queen comes in.
Right, it's very porous. It's a very porous position for Medinus, right? So this bishop is the guardian, essentially. Remember, last time he had the uncontested bishop, which held his dark squares around his king. This time, well, he would not. He's already committed his pawns to light squares, which means if that bishop's gone, so he's strong on the light squares, but all the dark squares can be really porous because they have no pawns to protect them. So those are great places to infiltrate. So bishop h6. But I mean, okay, so he didn't trade bishops, but he still has infiltrated, right? He can't do a ton with it right now, but it's still in his opponent's territory, making him uncomfortable about, future attacking prospects. So now gaining space, h4, you can always, just keep kind of chip away at his king side. Typical attacking idea in this King's Indian setup. Okay, knight's coming in, and you can see he's aiming for those dark squares to weaken the dark square complex around the king. So looks like he's actually sacrificing a pawn, but it gets crazy here. So of course, it's a Fischer game again, very complex. So he takes it, knight takes. You'll never get too simple with him. So he's essentially what he's doing is he's saying, okay, I take your knight, you take my bishop, and then I do a desperado because I see you're about to take this back anyway. So I toss my knight at you, but I damage your kingside structure. So now we're really getting somewhere because so now he only has 2 pawns protecting his king, and he's got a weakness on e6. So he's like, okay, well, if you take back, then I take back, and then we both have 2 minor pieces, a knight and a bishop each. So he would just pick up the f pawn, basically. F pawn, it would be essentially f pawn for the e pawn, but who do you think that's going to benefit? Fischer or Mendes, structurally? Whose position would you, I mean, if this happened, if he were to liquidate, just start trading down, whose positions would you prefer here? Just based on the pawn structure.
Fischer's.
Why is that?
He's got that F line open and his king is on it.
Yeah, well, the king's exposed because since we've taken that. And when you look at the pawn structure, well, again, he only has 2 guarding it, and this pawn is a weakness on e6. So that's something he would just harp on that. You know, he would just keep on hitting that point on e6, triple up on it or double up on it, and the knight will start coming in. So yeah, he's just more solid here. And again, his bishop's in his opponent's territory. His knight's going to start coming in, maybe even here, and then he could check him this way and stuff. So yeah, and oh yeah, by the way, when he goes there, he's going to hit the pawn. So everything's going to work together. So he doesn't want to do that. Instead, he tries to hold on to the bishop. Like, well, I'm going to use this to checkmate you. He's hoping he can, like, you know, move his bishop and come in with the queen, but it's not that simple. He can shield that. So he takes this bishop. Yeah, he's threatening checkmate, right? Long range checkmate here coming in. Blocks it. Knight's covering though. So like unassuming knight right there, but he's actually covering f3, so you can't get in. And then what he's doing is essentially he's trapping the bishop, right? So it's kind of nice. So this is where I'm saying where he makes these kind of ugly moves sometimes, where it's like, well, it's like it looks like you're about to get checkmated, but again, it's based on a deeper evaluation that he's making these objective calls. Yeah, to the untrained eye, it looks ugly, right? But he understands that it works. So, but it's risky, sure. It's a little risky to allow the bishop, but he sees deeply. You know, he sees like after g4, he's like, I almost win that bishop, if not just completely trapped. So knight comes in. He's got some murky stuff here though with the knight. The knight's invading on the 3rd rank, which is dangerous. The queen you could see is, again, those dark squares are not looking healthy around the opponent's king. Okay, e5. Yeah, he just takes it. I think he was trying to get some lateral defense with his queen. So he gives him that. Comes in with the knight. So yeah, he's got some counterplay. He just puts pressure on it. And then now he wants the endgame. So I mean, but you can see it's like the endgame is probably looking good if you can be ahead of bishop, right? Like whatever attacking well, obviously he's hoping for another, you know, going for one last hurrah with queen g3 check and then queen g2 checkmate. So he could still lose this if he's not watching. So just remember that when you're you know, you might have a great position, but your opponent, just like in the last game, the opponent was hoping with their g pawn, right? That was like their one that was their one main asset they were trying to use. Right now, the main thing he still has the bishop on h3, and he's got some pressure in here with the knight. So just watch out for that. That's his one hope there. So you got to make sure you are cognizant of that and take it away from them. Sounds a bit brutal, but that's the game. So h5. And yeah, this was interesting. So, well, he takes the knight. Why do you think he made the decision here? So entering the endgame now. Why do you think he made the decision to take the knight?
Does it weaken Black's pawn structure more?
Right. Again, remember we talked about earlier, if he had a split pawn, if his pawn got split with the pawn on e6, that would be like essentially a backward pawn, or that could be an isolated pawn that could be attacked. Here, it would actually be deep in our territory, but it's actually very easy to reach for us. We can easily pick it off. That pawn on e3 is not, yeah, I mean, it'll be defended once by the rook. But this bishop is just so out of play. It can't do much. Although they are hoping, that's the other thing, is that they're hoping to get the g pawn. because they have a knight. Oops. They have a knight, a bishop, and the pawn now, all attacking. So essentially, they're trying to hit those light squares before we have a chance to do something like king over here, trying to win the bishop. They're trying to make us take it or push it, and then finally the bishop is freed. But while they're busy doing that, we're entering a better endgame. So we have time to set that up. Okay, so we got, and that's the thing. I mean, he had to take it too because Queen G3 was coming. So this is the only way that Medina saves his bishop. Okay, you save your bishop, but you lose the endgame. But okay, but again, we have to know why Fisher evaluates it like this. That is so good for him. So after bishop takes, pawn. Now I think if the rook had taken, you trade rooks off, he may still get trapped. So he takes back with the pawn. And he ends up finally, he does let the bishop out. Bishop goes back. Yeah, let's just take a moment here though. Let's evaluate this endgame. So we have a rook and knight, but then it's going to get it's going to get traded off even more. But we have a rook and knight versus rook and bishop. How do you guys evaluate that? Who has the advantage and why do you think so?
Theoretically, shouldn't black's bishop be better than white's knight if it's just hanging on the side?
Well, I mean, and another thing theoretically is that people say, okay, bishops are better in endgames, especially if there are pawns on both sides, because the bishops are swift. They can quickly cover both sides of the board, right? Whereas the knights are more cumbersome. It takes a while. You know, once you get to one side, you can't get to the other side, right? So bishops can quickly deal with defense and attack two flanks. And also the rook and bishop are known to work well together, right? Cover diagonals, cover ranks and files. Of course, the knight's a tricky piece, and it's great if you can get it well posted, if it has a good outpost. And there are other features too, though. But of course, the knight's bad now, but that's, again, we're looking ahead. You know, black doesn't really have any targets, right? Maybe the H pawn, but they can't really get to the H pawn yet. We have to actually watch out for something like that. But in the meantime, we're aiming at their E pawn, and our knight can start rerouting. So given that, any other thoughts? Any other in terms of the evaluation? It's kind of tricky, and it's like it's just the kind of position, and that any games in general are tricky to evaluate because you have to. You can't just, like, a computer evaluates it by looking at, you know, millions of possibilities, saying, okay, based on best play for both sides, you know, all these hundreds of thousands or millions of possibilities, white or black has the advantage in a given position. But yeah, we're human, so we have to make more like intuitive judgments about. But it's good. The more you understand that about endgames, the better. You know, you can, like I said, you can win a lot of games just based on the endgame. I mean, obviously, if you can checkmate your opponent on move 10 or 20, do it. But if your opponent's good, they're not gonna give you that, right? So then you get what you can. If you can win a pawn or whatever it is, or trade into an endgame, and that you just think you can outmaneuver your opponent, that's fine. Whatever it takes, you know, just being open-minded about and not rigid about in terms of like different types of positions you can enter. Whatever works. So, any other thoughts on this endgame before we get a little deeper? There's gonna be an actual opportunity for a trade in a moment. That's when you really need to evaluate it, have a clear evaluation. So knight f1. Well, he's winning the pawn, it looks like, right? That's the thing. He's got 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 3, 6. No, he's actually gonna have 2 pawns then, right? Because he's already up. I forgot which pawn he took. Remember when his opponent threw his e pawn at him. So he got that pawn earlier. He was hoping for an attack. The attack fizzled out. And now Fisher's about to be up 2 pawns. It gets a little tricky because, well, his opponent counterattacks something, his f pawn. So he says, okay, well, if you take this pawn, I take your pawn. Okay, Fisher's still up 1 pawn. Oh, another rule of thumb: if you're ahead a pawn, you don't want to trade off all the pawns. You want to trade off the pieces, not the pawns. Because if you trade off all the pawns and you're left, there's so many situations where, like, you're down to 1 pawn only and it's a draw. So ideally, you want to have a few pawns left, like Fisher did in the last game. And then, you know, so for example, you can use 1 extra pawn as a decoy pawn sometimes. So you have the option of throwing that pawn at him and then picking off pawns on the other side of the board. But if you just have 1 pawn, like you can, let's say king and pawn endgame, If they get the king in front of it, that's like the bare bone situation. King goes in front of it, it's a draw. So just keep that in mind. Okay, I'm actually writing it right here. So I'm going to block this out. So just think, okay, so at this moment, this is your quiz. Bishop c6. Should white take on e3? It's based on a good evaluation of the position. Is it good to take the pawn on e3 and liquidate with rook take? Let's say rook takes e3, trading rooks, and then being in a knight versus bishop situation. Do we want that?
I think white can save the f3 pawn and go after the e pawn later.
Yeah, I mean that would be the best of both worlds, right? I mean, you should be looking for the maximum. The maximum, you always seek the maximum. So the maximum you can achieve here is you hold the f pawn and you win the e pawn, and then you're just up 2 pawns with a winning position, basically. Possibly, you know, he might have been able to do that. Let's see. Like, well, I guess the way to do that would be either f4 or king g2. I mean, the knight just maneuvered from h2, so he probably didn't want to go back. I mean, he could, but let's say he did king. If he did king g2, if the rook goes to f8, then he can take, and he's holding the pawn. I guess he could have done that. But you know, I think what it was is it's very efficient. It's like efficiency, parsimony, right? It's like same thing with academics you guys are doing now, right? It's like, what's the most efficient explanation for a theory, right? Theoreticians, right? They're always trying to seek the most efficient explanation. Same thing with endgames. Endgame is basically the core logic of chess. Because earlier in the game is like there's so much complexity, it's easy to miss things, but here you get your core logic, it just boils down, right? And then all those ideas are applied just with more complexity earlier in the game. So here, yeah. So if you can simply sometimes, and again, a computer might do the other thing, but a human will usually we'll just say, look, if I know I have a win, if it's good enough, and there's it just eliminates any counterplay from my opponent, and I just know I have it, I'll do it. Even if it's like the computer might say, oh, that gives you only +3, but the other one gives you +4.5 or something. But if human knows that that they can win that position and it's easier to do, they'll just do that. So with that in mind, should you go rook? What are the benefits of doing rook take? Let's evaluate that position. If you were to take on e3, so rook takes e3, rook takes e3, knight takes e3, and then they're going to take f3. So we're going to have our bishop versus knight endgame. We're going to be up 1 pawn. Okay, let's try to, again, that's another example where you have to envision it, right? This is only 1 to like 2 moves ahead, basically. You take the pawn, and then they take your pawn. How do you evaluate that? Think of the different elements of the game. Actually, let me just jot it down. This could be useful, like kind of, so you have some lenses to look through. So you got let's see, I'll jot it down on this side here. So kind of, so you have like different categories of things that when you're analyzing a position. And this is, you're going to see a little bit, again, less complexity here as we're entering the end game. It's still a tricky position, but you're going to, but if you can have a clear answer about each one of these elements, then you can get a good evaluation. That's the tricky thing about an evaluation, though, because you might really like one aspect of it, but not another one. So you have to weigh it out kind of. But let's see, so you'd weigh out like material, of course, right? So what's the material balance? Are you up like we were just talking about, Andres mentioned, well, if you can get 2 pawns, that's even better. So that's the material aspect of it. So that's important. We've got activity, piece activity, which is especially important, like especially king activity in the endgame, right? But just every single piece, right? So the value of every single piece. Is our king going to be well placed? Well, obviously this king is in the corner, so if we can get our king centralized, that would be good. And then we're going to look at pawn structure. And they're going to really, I mean, they're always important. Philidor said, pawns are the soul of chess. So you'll see that it's going to help you. Let's see, in the last game, that affected like the H file opening and the C file opening. I mean, that affected all the tactics that happened. Whereas now it's going to be about do you have the potential to win your opponent's pawns? Because the end game is pretty much you just want to be able to have enough pawns to get a queen, or can you get a queen? So can you win their pawns, and can they win your pawns, essentially? So I would look at things like, I'd be looking at the H pawn, like, is my H pawn, like I talked about with the rook, I might be thinking about their rook coming in, trying to win my H pawn. Can I win one of their pawns? Things like that. I think those are the main, yeah, those are really, when you get to the end game, those are the main things. What's the material, or what could it be after some exchanges? Activity of each piece, and pawn structure. So let's break that down. So material, we're up 1 pawn right now. So the question is, do we just trade a pawn off? Okay, don't trade off all the pawns. Okay, what about piece activity? So whose pieces are more active, or whose could potentially be more active? And that ties into pawn, it really just ties into pawn structure. So let's talk about pawn structure then. Whose pawns are, what do you think? Whose are more solid here? Who has weaknesses? Or just where are the weak? I mean, we have to make a final, judgment about it, but where are the weaknesses? At least we need to be aware of where they are.
The fact that black has 3 pawns on the ABC files, and then white has 4 to counter that, is a little concerning.
So that's so in terms of the pawn structure, we have a pawn majority. There's a majority of pawns on the queen. We call it queenside pawn majority, so 4 against 3. So you can use your majority to create a passed pawn. So that's something. That's actually a winning. That could become something that could win for you if you can go C3 and then D4. You make a passed pawn. That would just be, all else being equal, that could be your win right there. Anything else? What about the pawns over here on the whole king side?
The G6 pawn is undefended.
Right, and that's fixed in place. Now the H4 pawn is the same situation, and they're both the basis of small pawn chains, right? So this is the base. If you win this one, you might win this one. Same thing. If they win this, they might get this. So we definitely, like I said, if they get, we need to be really aware of that, because if we do lose the H pawn, we might lose the G pawn, and then suddenly madness is in the game, and he's got 2 pawns rolling at us. He could win. And then, like I said, well, then you're going to see the strength of the bishop. The bishop, hitting the light squares, the pawns on the dark squares, and making a mating net around your king or something. So that could be bad. That's important. But this is more accessible, actually. I think this one's easier reached. It's kind of harder for them to get to. You can easily go like king G3. You can easily guard that. So that's important. Is it attackable? And then obviously we have the tension here. We're both looking at each other's pawns. So that's the most immediate thing. I can take their pawn, they can take my pawn, right? That situation. Okay, so that's pretty much it in terms of like breaking that down. So that should give you, but when you ask yourself those questions and like those categories, at least you should have a better idea of the position. So now we just need to, and again, the specific line, should we do this trade? Now in terms of the efficiency of it. So you will be giving up that pawn. I mean, or essentially you would give up the opportunity to be up 2 pawns. So you're only gonna be up 1 pawn, right? You would have 3, 4, 5, 6 against 5. But so how would you guys evaluate that? Knight versus bishop. And that's the thing, we're going against kind of dogma, or like about chess, in terms of, bishops are better than knights in the end game. Now Fischer often won with the bishop against the knight. He often liked to do that. But it's all circumstantial. It always depends. Those are good rules, essentially the rules of thumb. They really have to treat them as rules of thumb. Same thing with doubled pawns. Doubled pawn, we talked about earlier, doubled pawns are bad, right? They're not always bad. They're sometimes bad, but it depends how you use them. It depends on the circumstance. If they're isolated, if they can't be defended. Sometimes, but usually weaknesses even give you dynamic play. You can play on the sides of them and things like that, and they control a lot of squares. So in this case, well, obviously we know the knight could be a great piece too. So just try to think about the prospects in terms of the piece, in terms of a knight versus bishop. So you've got your piece activity, your knight can get in there pretty quickly. Think about how your king can get in the game, and think about the pawn structure. What can the bishop do to your pawn structure? Are you concerned about the bishop on F3 after you trade off the rooks?
Probably not, because the one on your pawns on your king side are on dark squares.
Exactly. And that's why. So, and we talked about, he probably had the same concern. He's like, well, I'm looking at certain lines, and they may not actually happen, but there are certain lines where I don't like. I mean, it could be from here or from here, but the rook getting to here, and I really don't want to lose my h pawn. And then see, if he takes my f pawn and some trade and taking this one, it's still it's a little tricky because if he doesn't get the f pawn, then he can't go back to g4. But if he does, then he can quickly go take this one, check, take the other one. So those are kind of theoretical, not really concrete, but just just possibilities that Mendes has. Why give him the possibility? Now, if you trade off the rooks, you take away that possibility, and your knight can hop all around. Possibly, again, it's going to have to work with your king, and you can make that pass pawn. But the thing, there's a lot of value in not having to worry about anything, not having to worry about any weaknesses, essentially. So you're the one who can attack, like you can attack their g6 maybe, or you can maybe attack their base of this pawn chain if your knight can hop into c8 somehow or b5. So they have to worry about you starting to chip away at those. If you start making them advance, they become weaker. Then you're more attackable. Like we talked about with this pawn, it gets closer to us, it's more attackable, right? So it's just like when you study the endgame, you just see there's like so many. And again, these are all sort of rules of thumb, but you guys can take all that. You guys have more stuff to work. You guys have more stuff in your arsenal now that you're in your like kind of repertoire of ideas you can use in your games when you're making evaluations. Your judgment calls, because that's really what it comes down to. You got to make good judgment calls in chess. So you have your whole knowledge base, and then it's all about how do you apply that to the situation in front of you. That's what separates masters, right? Or every level as you get, they're better and better at making those good judgment calls. Because they have more better knowledge, and two, they know where they can recall it, and they know how to apply the knowledge in the right way. Because we can both have the same knowledge, but it's all about but you have to judge it. You have to judge it really, really well. That's where it comes down to. So bishop c6, rook takes. That's what he did. Let me see. Actually, but I'm curious. Let's just quickly see what does the computer recommend. I have a feeling maybe the computer doesn't agree with him. Let's see. Just press on Stockfish from leechess.org. Yeah, see, so the computer agrees with you, Andres, right? Fisher just saw a win. He liked it. He saw a winning situation. And maybe he liked the idea of like, I'm going to defeat the bishop with my knight. Maybe he liked that concept. But I think, it says king g2 and then rook takes e3. And you're correct. Yeah, you would have been able to essentially have the best of both worlds there. But he just goes for this. Let's see, the evaluation probably goes down a little bit. See, it actually realizes once it makes Fisher's move, it's plus 3.6, like as if it's 3.6 pawns ahead in its evaluation, and then now it goes up to 3.7, and now it's 4.4. See, so it turns out Fisher actually probably made the best move once you look at it deeper. So king f2, but the point is, do you have a clear win or not? So well, this is not that clear actually to most people, but he saw something. So he sees a pathway for his king. That's really what it's about. Now, again, the bishop can't attack anything, which is useful. Our knight can, but our king is getting to e5. There's no stopping it. We're invading, and then we can either come, like you can maybe even consider going to b8 and just eating those pawns, or and provoking them to advance, or just going here and trying to win this one. So let's see how he does it. Comes in. Okay, now, so we have this sort of opposition scenario. The kings are opposing each other. Whoever has to move first, whoever makes the opponent move first has the opposition. It's like they win the face-off, right? The jump ball. So king e7. So he does knight check. Now he can't take. Yeah, I mean, again, he's just up a pawn. He's going to make that pass pawn. He can't go into the king and pawn endgame. So that's important. We know we have a winning king and pawn endgame. Now so essentially what that does is it just gives him the opposition. He uses the knight to force the king aside. Comes in. Now in a regular game, in a regular king and pawn endgame, if you didn't have these pieces, essentially it would be that white would come in here last. And then if black has no useful moves, or whoever runs out of useful moves first, they're going to have to step aside, let the king advance, outflank them, we call it, get the opposition. So essentially he outflanked him, make him move aside, outflank him by essentially invading. And there it is. See, now he's looking at these targets over here, and simultaneously he's going to look over here. So he's working. So even though he has the knight, he's still working both sides because the bishop is usually better at that. But again, his bishop can only sit around and watch. And now so this is a useful move. He's getting off of the light squares that can be attacked. And also he's preparing, he can make a passed pawn with d4 and trade it off and run down uncontested pawn. There it is. He makes it right now. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Now, if you look at the evaluation, it's probably really high, plus 12, right? It sees a win. It's just over now. So b4, nothing to do about it. And you kind of just have a clear path. I call it the red carpet. You know, the pawn just has a red carpet. It just promotes. So d5 takes. Yeah, he has to give it up. I mean, there's really, the problem is when your king, if your king goes here, you just take the pawn. So it really came down to the mix of his central majority, active king, and he always has to worry about losing these pawns too. Plus, yeah, if he loses the g pawn, then he has another pass pawn. I think that's kind of what happened. Well, he's down a piece. It's over now, but he played on a few moves. Oh, he actually sacks the knight. But again, it's the efficiency of it. It's like, if you know that this is a winning endgame, if you're 100% confident that you can win the position, then you can just give away the knight. It's also kind of tricky too, because if you move the knight back, he starts attacking your knight and trying to win these pawns. So this move is like, look, we're in a king and pawn endgame. I have a protected passed pawn here that you're completely you completely tie them down to it. So it's just over. While he's busy, like I said about a decoy pawn. That's why we want to have more pawns. We don't need to have all the pawns, but just by having that one extra, having this and then the extra pawn there, plus having a couple more, that means that we can tie him down to this one with the decoy and then win these pawns. Then we actually end up winning on the other side of the board. But he just did something silly, like came here and let the pawn run, and then he's getting a queen. So, and he'll easily stop. Well, then he could even sacrifice his queen for this one, and then just eat all, and then the king just takes these pawns and gets new queens. So that's easy. All right, you guys have any questions about that game in terms of? But it's interesting. So the bishop is not always better than the knight in the end game. It's a wide open board, which are good for bishops. It's an end game, but the knight still won. But really, I think it comes down. It was because of the king activity, and he's up a pawn, by the way, which helps also. But if he didn't have the king activity, it would have been a lot harder to win. But he had that. He beat the opponent's king. He beat him to the punch, and yeah, he's just occupying the center. Does that make sense to you guys? All these, I know I threw a lot at you at once, but yeah, if you just kind of recall some of that, I think those ideas should come in handy when you're playing end games. But the key is just remember you can win a lot of games like that just through these nuances. Just get slightly better positions and try to have that clear. And again, you're calculating not just for immediate gain, but you're calculating like long-term prospects, looking at the pawn structure, looking at the piece activity, thinking about the sort of end game that you can have. And but yeah, and then yeah, definitely just study the whole games on your own. Look at Fischer games, Capablanca games. Look at some of those classic world champions. And then if you have time, I'd use I think we looked at chesstempo.com. I think you guys, yeah, we did check that the first time. So if you go on chesstempo.com, there's actually an end game trainer. You can do like 2 free ones a day. So you can do, that's actually practical too, because you play against the computer. So you have, like, let's say a winning position, but you have to use your technique to win that position. So I'd say if you just look at games, study games, do the end game trainer, and play your own games, obviously put it into practice, and then analyze those. You guys all know how to do like on here, you can just press the analysis board, or yeah, you can just press this, or like on chess.com, you can analyze afterwards. Do you guys ever use that? Okay, cool. So depends on how long you guys want to go. I know you guys are busy with stuff, so if you want to just kind of keep it, we could either keep it shorter, say, and let you guys get back to your work, or I can give you guys like an end game. If you have leechess.org, I can give you a position that you can play against each other. Like, let's say you're up a pawn or two. So it's a simulation where you'll say, I'll give you 2 extra pawns, and then you have to try to beat your opponent like that, and then you'll switch. Do you guys want to try that? Or yeah, if you guys want to get back to your work though, I would totally get that too. What do you guys want to do?
I have to head out, but
okay, yeah, it's finals week, so I think maybe we'll do that more next time. So all right, good luck with that. And how about you guys? Do you guys want to get in one of those? If Andres or Patrick, do you guys have to go too?
I'm down to try one of them.
And how about Andres? Do you have time?
I think I need to go actually.
You can go too. Okay, I'll do one against you, Patrick. I'll play one against you, and I'll see you guys. I guess in a couple weeks.
Yeah.
All right. Good luck. Good job, guys. So Patrick, the way you do it here is, I don't know if Anthony is around, if he was going to play. But so what you do you have leadchess.org?
I believe I have an account.
Okay, how about
Yeah, I should.
I'll set up the board, and then why don't you pull it up? It takes like 30 seconds to set it up if you can find it. So board editor. So I don't think chess.com has this function. Have you ever seen it where you can play from a given position?
I think there's one for that. It might be only for premium though.
I have that. I mean, because if you have a title, they give you it's pretty cool because they want to attract like title players, get GMs and national masters and everything there. So you can have a diamond membership for free. But I don't know, I haven't seen it. I know you can. There's like analysis and all that, but I'll have to look around. I like that. So at least on Lichess, I know how to use this where you can. So for example, it's interesting where if I take away, let's say white, I'll remove 2 pawns. So the player who has black, let's say you start with black, and we're going to have knights and bishops. So that came up in this game. So we'll have knights and bishops. I guess you can play around with it too. You can have you can do like 2 bishops versus 2 knights or something. You can do like down one person has an extra, one person has a rook, the other one has a bishop, but the person with the bishop has 2 pawns. So you can do different training scenarios. This is pretty good where you have 2 extra pawns and you try to win. So it's going to be, okay, white to play, but black to win, basically. And yeah, continue from here. And then you just play with the friend. Were you able to get in? I'll give you a minute.
Yeah, I'm logged in.
Okay, so let's do like 10 minutes plus 10 seconds each move. So we could discuss a little bit. You gain some time. That sound good?
Okay.
10 plus 10. Okay, so I'm gonna have, so I'll play with white, but I have 2 pawns down. So you try and essentially, it looks kind of weird at the beginning, but once you start moving your pieces out, it's gonna be like a regular end game where you're just up a pawn or 2. So I'll try to win a pawn back. We'll see. Okay, so I play as white, and what's your name on there?
My username is Petri.
P what?
Petri.
Oh, there it is. Like Petri dish. Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
I found it.
Cool. Yeah, you see the swords up there. You get the challenge. Okay. So yeah, so theoretically it should be a winning position, but but you have you can try to make pass pawns or something, or trade pieces, but you have to try and turn this into a win. And I have to do everything I can to try to draw. So yeah, if I can trade pawns, I'll do it. We'll see if I have the chance. Okay, so I'm attacking your knight. You play h6. So, well, I'm giving up so you're gonna have the bishop pair, and I might get a pawn back. We'll see. It looks like I get a pawn back though, because I want to remove the defender.
Right.
But you do have the bishop pair, which is useful in the end game. Okay, so always ask yourself, what does my opponent want? I don't know if did you intentionally want to give it to me, or did you
No,
miss it?
I overlooked that.
Okay, so when I go, they say, why did my opponent? I mean, I'm developing it. Why did my opponent go there? Okay, your bishop's coming here. Makes sense. Guard C7, and you can always kick my knight out.
Yeah.
So candidate moves will be obviously E4 will be like the main move. Well, now that I have more center, may as well. Yeah, that's got to be the move. E4, gain some space in the center, anchor in my knight, and unleash my bishop. I got to do that. Yeah. Otherwise, maybe C4, but I think this makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Always have like two options you're looking at. Okay, so now we're in a position where you've got the bishop pair, and you've got an extra pawn, so it's still good for you.
Yeah.
Just gotta try and so now is where you want to have like, okay, it's pretty clear. Situation's pretty set, but what's your plan here?
I want to bring out either my knight or my bishop.
Okay, yeah, you got to develop those guys. Get the knight and bishop out next, and try and develop them around some kind of plan. So what would be your? I mean, given the main imbalances here are well, we have the double pawns there, which don't really seem to hurt. They don't seem to hurt you. You have the bishop pair, and what's the other main imbalance?
Uh,
The main difference. If you break down there's different concepts of material and piece activity and pawn structure.
you have more of your pawns out.
Oh, I do. Yeah, that's true. I have a little more space with those pawns. I have a little more central. That gives me a little more central control, which would be like especially relevant in the middle game if I can use those to attack. Whereas now I'm like, I'm not going to checkmate your king with right now. You know, if there's not a queen around or something, that would be impressive, but it would be really hard to get. It'd have to be like no one's going to win in the next 20 moves or 15 moves or something. It's going to go on for a bit. And what else? There's one other main feature of this position. Going back to the beginning.
That I simply have more pawns, or
Yeah, you have the extra A pawn. So specifically, your A pawn. That's it's not just that you have a pawn. It's that A pawn specifically, and you want to. I mean, that could become a queen. Ideally, you want that pawn to become a queen. So when you develop your pieces, you could kind of develop them around. I mean, if that's your goal. I mean, obviously you want that to be a queen, right? But if that's your main purpose right now is to push the pawn and become a queen, then think about, okay, how am I going to coordinate my pieces to make that happen? Yeah, I mean, I need to develop as well. So it's either the knight or the bishop. Trying to stir up any kind of trouble I possibly can to try and stay in the game. Let's see. Possibly, I don't know, possibly C4, pawn C4 is kind of interesting. Yeah, why not? Get those pawns rolling. But I really should be bringing out pieces. I'm kind of doubting that, but we'll see. But there is kind of a threat attached to it. What would that threat be that I have? Sort of I mean, not like a winning threat. Oh, so it's a very annoying move that I have, actually. What's the idea?
so you could possibly do C5, move my bishop
Sure,
out of the
yeah,
way.
why not? It's protected by the D pawn, and especially since my knight looks at your C pawn while it's there, it may as well make use of that. So I want to get your C pawn or get your bishop. So what do you do about it?
I can play B6.
Just pretty much stops it in its tracks. That seems good. And then both of our pieces probably start coming out. Let's see. The interesting thing is that then I figured you could have played c6 even earlier. Just c6, kick him out of there. You say, hey, your knight doesn't need to be on d5, just kick him out. Now it's a little tricky because if you play c6, I could take the b pawn. Since you've moved that tiny fact, or the fact that you had the a pawn there on a6. So if you move the c pawn, I take the b pawn. So at least it can't be done yet. Okay, somehow I need to, what's the best way to finish the development? Probably, I think, so rather than the random, just randomly bring my knight out, I want to actually go to e2 so it can go to c3 and kind of focus more, concentrate on the queen side a little more. Especially because I want to make sure I keep an eye on your pawns over there. And the thing, I've also moved three of my central pawns, meaning that they could be a little bit loose, like I have to be careful that they don't get overextended. Ah, interesting. That's a good move. That's a good move. Yeah. So you brought it out with purpose. So, well, let's see what your purpose. I'm not going to say it, but let's see if you do it. It seems like you did. Okay. I actually want my king in there. So, like I mentioned, my pawns are a little loose, so they can use some support from the king. In the end game, the king wants to come out. Oh, there's that too. So since you're guarding, because you saw if you play g5, if you had done it immediately, I would have just won a pawn back.
Yeah.
Now you're holding that one. Okay, interesting. Oh wait, I forgot. Yeah, even though I got your central pawn, but that you still have the h pawn. I totally forgot about that. The lurking back there on h6. So potentially, yeah, I have to keep my eyes on both sides of the board. I totally forgot. Okay, nice. So you can start doing like h5, h4, a5, just kind of expanding on both ends of the board, both flanks. Okay, that is annoying. Good move. It's annoying for your opponent. It must be a good thing. Let's see. I think I'm just going to continue for now with this idea. And then finally, everything's coming out. The bishop could come out if it needs to e2 or something. Yeah, pass. We say, well, it's not a pass pawn yet until if you play h5, if you play h4, g4, h3, trade it off, get it to h, then it's a pass pawn. But you got to push them. You say pass pawns must push. So start to expand. Okay. I need to find a way to fix them in place, ideally. Yeah, this is tricky. Well, again, I do have the central pawn mass though. So given that, that's my strength. So I should be trying to use that somehow. Yeah, I can go wrong very easily here. This is tricky. Oh, I think I'm going to reroute the knight. So both knights are each one's looking at each flank. So that was the other thing though, that I thought you were going to go c6 since your knight was on d. I guess that was that was possible as well. The knight on d7, it guarded b6, so you can play c6 anytime you wanted without dropping the b pawn, as well as your idea of g5.
So it looks like at some point you intend on doing d5 to strengthen the center pawns.
Well, I could advance it, but I will be opening up like the e5 square. That's the thing about my kind of porous center. Well, right now they're okay, but if I start advancing too much, like, yeah, d5, then you go knight e5 maybe, or bishop e5. It could get uncomfortable for me. Maybe later though. I would like to expand, but yeah, you're not, the way you've set up your pawns, you're not really making it possible for me. Okay, keep advancing it. Let's see. So one of the ideas I was thinking of, knight f5. Oh, okay. Yeah, if I go knight f5, you just check me with the bishop. It doesn't do much for me. Yeah, you're handling this really well. I would just say you want to eventually you want your bishop to get in the game, probably. You know, get those last pieces in the game somehow. But it's a little tricky right now. That's the value of the centralized pawns there. They keep pieces. They're controlling a lot of central squares. But you're doing you're working the flanks great here. You know, so H. You just have to stop it from continuing to advance. Yeah, bishop should come out. Well, given that you know that if I play d5, you get e5 squared. So you've just essentially gained control of e5. And if I push, it doesn't. I mean, it gives me a passed pawn, but I don't see it moving anywhere. Huh. So nice job. Let's see. I have to react to it somehow. If you're trying to take it. I mean, it might be my best choice. I would like to use the d5 square for a knight because I can come back. Maybe, let's see. Should become very complex. I guess I'm going to take it. And following that rule that if you're down pawns, it's probably better to trade them off, right? So I can get down to that one last pawn. That would be the goal. Good, activating your knight. I almost just blundered too because I was about to bring my knight. I was like, oh, I'm gonna go knight d5. I'm like, oh yeah, you take this. You're hitting my e pawn now. So yeah, maybe I'll do knight e to d5. That might be better. Anything else? Seems rational. Let's try that, because it'll make you at least think about your b6 and f6 pawns there.
Yeah, because the b6 pawn is now undefended.
Right, now that the knight moved. So in hindsight, maybe you could take with your bishop instead of your knight, but you can still cover them. But it just means you probably have to go back or something, unless you want to give one of them away. But I doubt that's the thing. That's what I want, because if I get that one, then I'm like, okay, I'm back in the game. I got
Yeah.
equilibrium again, right? Okay, that one's continuing to march. Now, yeah, I don't really care about the f pawn that much. I think if I can just get rid of that, if I can safely take the b pawn, that would be better for me, because then I don't have to worry as much about the yeah, about the possibility of a majority of pawns coming in. Yeah, I guess there was nothing you could have done, because if you had gone back to d7, my plan was if you went knight d7, I was going to go bishop g4 and just try to remove that knight. So I think, yeah, effectively, I think I probably would have gotten it back. But this way, let's see. Knight takes b6. I got to look out for tricks here. It seems like a very tricky position. You have like a knight b3 check. Because again, I have some weaknesses here. So. Knight, I can toss in something like knight to b5. No, knight b5. You take e4 again. Check. Okay, I'm just going for it. I'm gonna take. So since I gain time against the bishop on c8. Okay. Look at there. So now we have equal material, but you have good pieces. Your pieces are well placed. Huh. Guess I'll just probably go back. Let's see. I really don't like that knight to b3 check. Your knight can just start hopping. Yeah, possibly is like hopping all over my position. There's not much I could do about it, I guess. Because you go to b3, and then you go to bishop comes in, or you go to d4. So again, just trying to think of your possibilities. Probably have to just play something like f3 and stabilize this center. But you have good pressure here. And your bishop is hitting the dark squares. I can't defend the dark squares. So other aspects other than material are relevant here. Okay. Yeah, so a big blunder would be like bishop king e3. walking into bishop c5 fork. So I'm definitely not going to go to e3. Probably I will go to, oh, that's uncomfortable. Yeah, like I said though, if I go to a c2, you have knight d4 check. Maybe it's d. I don't know. I don't like these moves much. Wait, here, knight check, king c2, knight d4 check, king d3, hitting the knight, defending the bishop. Yeah, I'm gonna have to. It's like a lesser of two evils situation. But you have a lot of nice activity here. Did I miss something? I feel like I missed something. I mean, you have this. I saw that. Okay, I go here. Okay. So it seems that I'm holding the fork down, but I can still feel, I feel a little bit like I got kind of Swiss, my position is kind of Swiss cheese. Yeah, I think you have some nice maneuvering ideas. Bishop here, okay. I was thinking like maybe knight e6 to f4 check is also interesting, but I think I have a one response to that, like knight d5 holding f4. But yeah, I have to be like very careful here. Okay, I'm getting away from your knight now. But my bishop is not, no, I think it was the right choice to hold your knight. My bishop is not good, so it's good that your knight is more effective. So better not to trade. Well, may as well improve this guy. Wasn't doing much. But now is that phase where we're both trying to improve our pieces, maximum activity. Let's come in here. To watch our time though. Again, 10 seconds to move. Just be careful of the clock.
Yeah.
Hey, bye.
It's always in times like this I start panicking, and this is when I mess up big.
Yeah, just keep your calm, play solidly. Okay, as long as you're aware of where the weaknesses are and stuff, then you should be fine. Okay. I will take with the pawn. Let's see. We have opposite colored bishops, which are known to be kind of drawish. Let me check. I can take the A pawn. But, oh, it would not work, would it? I see that. I see that. Because you have king over. It does not look good. Okay, I don't think it works. Okay, so I have to toss in this move then. So I get away from that. Still threatening your A pawn, but I mean the F pawn is not that important, but why not? So I can get it. Aha, okay. This one. Oh, your bishop. You want to do take back? I can take your.
I didn't see that.
You want to ask for a take back? I'll give you a take back on that one. Okay, yeah, don't play F5. I mean, your F7 pawn though is hanging, but yeah, there's nothing to do about that one. But the A pawn is more pertinent, I think. Watch your time, then. Watch your time. There you go.
Yeah.
Oh, was there no way to hold it? You might have had king b4. I don't know. Oh.
Yeah. I usually never go down to the wire like this.
Yeah, you gain 10 seconds each time. Yeah, ultimately, I think I ended up getting, but so that's something to work on then, because sometimes you will have to play in those situations where you're playing on the increment, or maybe you have it's not an increment, but you have I don't know, 10-minute game, and you just,
this looks like a bad position for me.
It's going to come down to the wire. What's that?
This looks like a bad position for me.
Yeah, that's the pawns are just gonna usher the pawn in basically with the king and the bishop. Maybe just take it, because I have to watch out for that possibility of you pushing to g4 and then it finally making the. You were very close. What happens when I played f3? It made it so you didn't have g4 to support h3, right? So I try to cling on to those. Light squares. But it's the kind of situation where you start with a big advantage and you have to keep the advantage. But that's hard. It's really hard to do because your opponent is fighting for life, trying to come back in the game. And they will find resources. Actually, I'm not going to take. I'll just push. I'm just going to try to promote this guy. Yeah, just try to promote this one. And you could just support it.
This is where none of my moves are.
That's too much. Now it's too much. And then I could just get the queen with check. Should be able to be a checkmate without needing to take the h pawn. But let's see. I mean, well, let me see. If I go king here. I think let's see, the king supports, and then I think that should be fine. There should be a checkmate there, so I can let you take it. But by the time it queens, I should be able to set up a checkmate. Let's see. I have to be a little careful about that. I mean, worst comes to worst, I could come over and take the pawn, but I'm almost certain it should be to a checkmate. Let's see. Start with this one. Yeah, that'll be a force. Or at least I'd have to do it on the light squares, because you can get a queen and then be on the dark squares as long as I can set it up on the light squares. So for instance, a big blunder would be like king c5, walking into your checks, right? But actually I could just throw the b pawn forward. You get a queen, and then in b5, since the king's stalemated, but fortunately you still have pawn moved. That looks like a checkmate. Yep, b4, and then you do get the queen.
Yeah,
but it's too late. It's too late by then because you already have the mate. You've already have the mating net. So
yeah,
good game, good practice game. You played really well. It's interesting. It's an interesting scenario, right? To play from the simulation kind of thing.
Yeah.
What were you saying?
So it's definitely a strategy that I haven't used, because usually when I do timed chess games, I kind of rush at the beginning, try to gain on time. But usually what happens is I don't look quickly enough, and it causes havoc on my own
Right.
position.
So yeah, it's a tough balance. It's a fine balance with the time, using your time effectively. Oh, I gotta run to. But yeah, nice, really nice practice, and yeah, great job today, Patrick. Good luck with your finals. I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
All right, take care. Bye.
You too.
All righty. Are you all done?
Yeah, we just finished.
Cool. Let me cut the stream. You ended up on YouTube yet again.